It was almost midday when the collection trucks arrived at the location, an abandoned Freddy Fazbear's pizza restaurant. The building was still entirely intact, minus the boarded up windows and doors, decaying door frames, and peeling paint. Vanessa was the first to get out of her car. She walked in front of the building and turned back to the others. "This is the place," she said. "Exactly the same as we'd left it." A few weeks ago, the Pizzaplex had received a radio call from a teenager who'd found themselves taking shelter from a storm at the old restaurant. Since she was working the night shift at the time, Vanessa was sent to investigate. That's how she found the place, and the kid who she picked up. The girl claimed that the robots came to life in the middle of the night and ended up helping her out. Ever since, Vanessa had wanted to revisit the strange building and investigate further. Was it true that the animatronics were still here, and that they were still functional? The next person to approach was Mitchell, a paranormal investigator. Following closely behind him was Sanjay, the project manager, who stepped out of one of the trucks. "Wow," said Mitchell as he fiddled with his phone and some sort of handheld device. "Place must be old as hell. Said it's from the 80s or something." "Yeah," Vanessa replied as the group began making their way over to the building. "I think this was one of the bigger locations back in the day, but only stayed open for about a year. Some pretty bad stuff went down there." Sanjay chimed in. "Wasn't it one of the animatronics attacked someone?" "Allegedly, yeah," said Vanessa, as well as a few other things. They had reached the doors now, which lay half open behind the now fallen boards. Mitchell fiddled with his device again as Sanjay pulled some torches from his bag. "Okay, so who's going in first?" he asked with a nervous laugh. Fazbear Entertainment would like to welcome you to the Fazbear Collection, an exciting new project dedicated to celebrating the history of our star Freddy Fazbear and the rest of his beloved cast. We have gathered a team of experts to track down and restore old animatronics so they can have a new life on stage in our museum. Along the way, we will be answering questions and debunking some of the long persisting rumours about our franchise, so we can move on to a brighter and more marketable future. There's a lot to learn and go over, so join paranormal investigator Mitchell, franchise expert Vanessa, Fazbear technician Jamie, transport handler Catherine, and project manager Sanjay, as they explore the history of Freddy Fazbear and with that established, it's time to dive right in and see what the team have uncovered tonight on Fazbear Collection. Despite it being midday, the inside of the pizzeria was unsettlingly dark. A substantial layer of dust coated the tiles. The walls were lined with both cobwebs and torn remains of posters and birthday party banners. This place had remained almost untouched for over 50 years, and it sure felt like it. And they were still here too. Up on the main stage stood 3 animatronics. A Freddy, a Bonnie, and a Chica. Stood as if about to perform despite all the customers being long gone. The colours of their plastic shells had faded, outfits were covered in a thin layer of grime. Freddy had a microphone still clutched in his hand. Bonnie's ears must have been broken at some point, the top halves hung loosely from exposed wires. His arms were still positioned to be holding his guitar, which was unfortunately now missing. Chica was also missing several parts of her face. Her eyes and mouth left as gaping black pits, and the rest of her head casing was heavily cracked. Vanessa approached the stage. "This is incredible. I can't believe they just left them like this." She turned to the others. "Reckon we should scout out the rest of the place?" Sanjay nodded and took out his phone. "Hey Catherine," he said with the phone pressed to his ear. "Yeah, there's definitely stuff here. Got 3 full-sized animatronics so far, so get the trolleys ready." Shortly after, he ended the call. "Well, let's get to it." "Okay, so the kid, name was Rachel, I think, told me there's what sounds like a balloon boy somewhere around here," explained Vanessa to the group. They investigated the dusty corridors. "Oh, and she said there was some giant wire monster thing that could use, like, radio or something." "Oh, that sounds delightful," Sanjay interjected. Mitchell raised his device and shook it slightly. "Picking up a low-level remnant around here. Might get some activity too." "Oh, lovely," Sanjay responded. During the group's investigation, they had found what they were looking for, and called in some extra staff to start moving things out of the restaurant. The arcade and prize counter had remained miraculously unlooted, so a decent stock of items could be collected, including the aforementioned Balloon Boy, in a similar condition to the others. There weren't many, but a few decorations were intact enough to be removed. The last room the group checked was the Kids' Cove. Not much remarkable, the damp had gotten to the plushies and furnishings of the soft play area. Next to it though, there was something much more interesting. A twisted pile of animatronic parts and miscellaneous scrap metal. This must be the infamous Toy Foxy, or Mangle as it said they ended up calling her, Vanessa said. I think it's worth bringing this with us too, tell the guys. Mitchell examined the broken mass more closely, immediately noticing his remnant reader was going nuts around this thing. It took him a few seconds to find a face. Looked like a clown with the most intimidating set of jaws you could put on a children's entertainment robot. Though to be fair, it looked pretty helpless now, laying on the ground. Hopefully it'd stay that way. With the trucks loaded, Sanjay got back in with Catherine, one of the drivers. Pretty major all we got here, right? She asked. Yeah. Honestly, it's super strange how it's all still here, replied Sanjay. Almost as if he began to trail off. As if someone's been guarding it, she laughed as she started the ignition. I've heard some crazy crap about these Fazbear robots. The trucks pulled away and began their journey back to the warehouse. Evening was drawing in, and the pizzeria was left behind once more. The following day, the team regrouped at the warehouse. Sanjay and Catherine were discussing inventory, while Vanessa and Mitchell went to check on the animatronics. They'd been moved to the back room next to a temporary workshop. Joining them today was Jamie the mechanic. Alright, these are the bots, asked Jamie as they began to examine the machines. The mechanic circled Freddy for a moment before standing on their toes in order to get a closer look at his right shoulder. Didn't one of the moving guys say his arms were stuck? They stepped back. Damn, these guys are super old. Don't think they've used this type of joint in decades. Gonna be a hell of a job, they added with a sigh. Vanessa leaned against the wall. Yeah, this whole thing is pretty wild. Should we start trying to boot them up? She shrugged. I mean, it's kind of a miracle if they beat up at all, but it's worth a shot, right? Mitchell replied. Honestly, I'm the most curious about that story he told me in the car. He pulled out his phone. I really think that girl you talked to was onto something. The readings I was getting from that location were insane. He approached the crate in the corner that currently stored Toy Foxy. I'd honestly love to set up some cameras to record him overnight. Should ask Sanjay if I can do that. So first things first, Jamie did a thorough examination on each of the machines, listing down repair jobs in relative order of how realistically fixable are they. Jobs such as Bonnie's limp ears were probably a quick wire reattachment, while some things such as Freddy's jammed arm and BB's missing hand were going to be all-day jobs. Jamie wasn't sure what to do about Chica's smashed face, and lastly, Foxy was long beyond repair. Vanessa even said the pizzeria staff themselves were rumoured to have stopped caring when the place was actually open. Later on, Catherine and Sanjay had gone to check out the building that was to become Freddy's museum, leaving the others to themselves. Jamie had found some charging cables that were compatible with the toys, and with him being the lightest and easiest to move of the main trio, had moved Bonnie into the workshop. Vanessa walked into the surreal side of this 80s animatronic, sat on a chair hooked up to a power console and computer. The models were usually charged through the feet while standing on stage, but did have ports in the back of the neck and arms if the usual method wasn't available, which turned out to be very convenient for the team. Jamie looked at Vanessa. Yeah, turns out he's actually charging, which is good, I guess. Maybe, they said. Gonna boot him in a second and hope he doesn't, try to kill us or something. Jamie and Vanessa both laughed awkwardly. Really don't know why the big bosses have to insist on making these guys so damn dangerous. You'd think after this 70 odd years this franchise has been alive, they'd figure out a way to make robots that, don't carry the risk of maiming you for the dumbest of reasons. Jamie added as they adjusted their seat to be a few inches further away from the animatronic. They looked at the computer and turned it on. There was a long silence before a few lines of code began scrolling across the screen. Okay, he's doing something, exclaimed Vanessa, honestly surprised. Jamie examined the boot code, noticing the options for a standard start or to run some demos, which would be things that were pre-recorded, such as stage routines and songs. They decided that for now they'd try a simple stage demo, labelled Grand Opening Greeting Performance Version 1. There was another pause, then Jamie could hear the whirring of Bonnie's cooling fans and the crackling of his wires. Then he jolted upright. His arms locked into the same position they were back at the pizzeria and his eyes snapped open. And then he said, "Welcome, boys and girls! Welcome to the new and improved Freddy Fazbear's Pizza!" His voice was shrill and crackled slightly. He stiffly turned his upper body left and right as he continued. "You probably already know who I am, but just in case you don't, I'm the new and upgraded Bonnie the Bunny, here to deliver a stellar performance once more." Vanessa and Jamie watched him continue his pitch in bewilderment, and they looked at each other and laughed again, a bit more genuinely this time. At this point, Mitchell came in. "Alright guys, the cameras are up." He stopped. "Holy crap, that thing's creepy when it's actually moving." And to be fair, Vanessa thought as she watched the old Bonnie, compared to the new machine she was used to at the Pizzaplex, there was definitely something uncanny about his stilted movements, doll-like facial animations, and how his voice was somehow both overexcited and dull at the same time. Though some of the creep factor was diminished by the broken ears swinging around and sparkling whenever they were evidently supposed to move. Eventually Bonnie ended his demonstration and returned to a demure sitting position with his hands resting on his lap, tilted his head down and half closed his eyes, as if waiting further instructions. "Okay, that's cool," said Vanessa, to break the silence. You guys want to go for lunch or something to plan what we're going to do next?" "Sounds good," replied Mitchell, who was still stood right next to the door. Jamie turned off the computer and one by one, the group left the room. Mitchell swore he could have heard the squeaking of the robot's joints as he closed the door. About half an hour's drive from the warehouse was the building that was to become Freddy's museum. The outer construction was complete, and the building had been fitted with the very basics, such as the bathrooms and storage for the equipment and machinery. There were 2 floors and a basement, which was to become the new workshop. The top floor was currently being planned to contain a small cafe for the customers, as well as generally hold more space for exhibits. Although the museum was currently bare, things were looking pretty good. Catherine had finished looking around when she found Sanjay on his phone talking to the boss, as he often was. After a few minutes, he put the phone down. "Boss again?" she asked. "Yeah, you know, the usual," he replied. "Updated him on what we found yesterday. He sounded pretty pleased, I think." "Yeah, guess so," said Catherine. Sanjay pondered for a moment. "Considering how much we retrieved, I think the 87 restaurant will be one of the main exhibits. Maybe the first one as the customers come in?" He gestured to the empty hall before them. "Might set up a stage for Freddy and them, you know, like the one they were originally on. Could be kinda cool." He walks around the room in a circle. "Maybe have some arcade machines on one side, stick that weird kid robot next to him. Might have a small sectioned off bit for that other one." He returned to Catherine. "Yeah, that'd work. What about the information?" she asked, to which Sanjay replied, "Oh yeah, boss mentioned that. We obviously gotta talk about the closure." The closure of the restaurant was subject to many rumours and rampant speculation. And that was when it originally closed all those years ago. Sanjay had been wondering ever since yesterday about what had happened, and how on earth the team were even going to find that information. Everything happened so long ago that most of the witnesses would no longer be around. After checking the building, the two started heading back to the warehouse. The Fazbear team had reunited in the meeting room to discuss their findings. The meeting room, as they called it, was a small enclosed side room with a window that looked out to the rest of the warehouse and an interactive whiteboard. The team had also moved in some seats and a corkboard for displaying notices and messages. "So far, I can confirm that Toy Freddy, Bonnie, Chica and Balloon Boy are operational. Got them running for a few performance demos and songs," explained Jamie. "Of course, they need some repairs and Chica's voice is really rough, so yeah, we should have these guys exhibitable after they've been cleaned up and stuff," added Vanessa. "Oh, of course," Mitchell chimed in. "I've got the stuff set up for my investigations, which I think I can start tonight." He leaned back in his chair. Sanjay looked over the group and stepped forward. "That's great," he said. "Now, I spoke to the boss about the exhibit and, he tried to figure out the best way to explain the order he was given. For the research, the boss would like to gather information on, this certain event that happened at the restaurant. The exhibit, or at least some part of it, is gonna be about the bite of 87. Mitchell noticed that Jamie did a double take. Vanessa opened a laptop and began looking for something. "Well, I mean, I kind of expected it, but wow, I guess they're really going there." Mitchell leaned forwards. Alright, so I'm obviously not super well versed in Freddy Fazbear lore, so what exactly was the Bite of 87? Is that thing you were on about, like, yesterday? Yeah, said Vanessa grimly as she turned her laptop to show an old newspaper article. They say there was this police investigation that set the restaurant on the ropes, but there was one last birthday party booked during which, one of the new animatronics lashed out at a security guard and tore out his frontal lobe. Yeah, the Toys, which was the name given to this set of animatronics, was supposed to have been scrapped due to the incident, but as we've discovered, they weren't. That, Mitchell thought, was incredibly strange. Why had they just been abandoned? He was already thinking of some ways he could attempt to communicate and maybe gather some answers. You know, given my findings, if tonight goes as I'm predicting, he said as he stood up, maybe, just as a possibility, we could try to find out what happened from the robots themselves? Everyone stared at him. Well, you can try it, mate, said Catherine. If those guys are, like, actually haunted or whatever. Other than Vanessa's research, it's the best shot we have, said Jamie quietly. Alright, Mitchell thought. Barely 2 days in and I've got a mystery to solve. That evening, Catherine, Sanjay and Jamie had gone home, leaving Mitchell and Vanessa at the warehouse to begin the investigation. Vanessa sat in the meeting room to start researching on her laptop and to keep an eye on Mitchell's cameras. Speaking of which, she checked to see him in the room with the animatronics. She watched him check in his remnant reader again and then head into the workshop. Mitchell entered the quiet room. He'd moved a table in front of the chair housing the animatronic, with an audio player and a spirit box on one side and a taser on the other, which Jamie had helpfully informed him to use if one of the animatronics decided to get a bit funny. Sat at the table was the last animatronic they'd booted. Toy Chica her name was, apparently. She was slumped forwards, arms hanging loosely by her sides. Mitchell sat in the chair and examined her for a second, and took out his phone using the torch to briefly peer into her empty face, noticing a set of mechanical teeth far back inside her head. Unnerved at such an odd design decision, he set his remnant reader down and leaned over the desk to turn the computer on. He'd opted for a standard boot this time, and to see what happened. He watched the boot codes continue to scroll once he'd made his option, and then noticed his remnant reader spiking as the animatronic in front of him reached for the sides of her head and jerked upright. Mitchell watched with nervous anticipation as she slowly started to look around. "Where am I?" asked the robot in a halting, grainy voice. Her hollow eyes met Mitchell's and seemed to examine him in a way that felt like she was looking for recognition. What's going on?" Mitchell introduced himself. "My name is Mitchell Brady. I'm a paranormal investigator hired by Fazbear Entertainment." She turned back at him and tilted her head in a fittingly avian manner as she listened. He continued, "I've been hired on a project that aims to collect and restore old animatronics." He began to lighten his tone. "'Cause they want to build a museum or something." "Wait, old?" she interjected, but fortunately more in surprise than offence. Mitchell thought carefully about how to word his next statement. "This may come as a shock to you, but the current year is 2040. It was eerie how something lacking much in the way of an animated face was still able to convey a slow realization that was turning into horror as her artificial brain performed the math. Mitchell put his hands on the table. "It's okay. I understand your confusion," he reassured. "Your friends are in the next room if you want to see them." "Why, yeah, I'd like that." Meanwhile, Vanessa was poring over a few more articles she'd found. Unfortunately, since the internet was in its infancy during the time frame she was looking for, information was pretty scarce. She'd found a few old forums where a few people discussed their memories of the restaurant, including one that discussed the police case. They never did find out what happened to those poor kids. Vanessa decided to check the cameras again. In the storage room, Mitchell was with the animatronics. Except for Freddy. Vanessa had become fairly accustomed to seeing the robots wander around during the night shift at the Pizzaplex, but whether it was the lonelier atmosphere of the warehouse or the unfamiliar machines, this felt a bit more worrying. She continued watching the camera as Mitchell had also noticed, and it looked like he was off to search. Then Vanessa heard a knocking on the window behind her. She didn't want to turn around. Mitchell rounded the corner to find Freddy staring into the meeting room window. Hearing his approach, Freddy swiveled his upper half to almost face him and met his cautious gaze with a dissonantly placid stare that revealed the lenses of his animatronics eyes had blown out, dilating his pupils into glassy black voids. "Ah, hello there. We appear to have been moved somewhere and I couldn't help but want to ask what's going on," said Freddy. From inside the room, Mitchell heard Vanessa let out a sort of scream sigh in presumably relief. Soon, Mitchell had gathered everyone back into the storage room and told the robots about their removal from the old facility and potential repurposing. He decided not to mention the restaurant's troubled history or the bite yet. It'd probably be best if he gave the robots some time to adjust to their new surroundings before potentially overwhelming them with interrogation. As he suspected, we were dealing with a remnant haunting here. Remnant was a sort of metal alloy that contained ectoplasm formed from the memories and emotions of sentient beings. It could cause strange side effects if it was used with an object or machine, which seemed to be what was happening here with the animatronics. It could effectively cause something to become haunted and display supernatural properties even without the presence of a spirit. A haunting with no ghosts, so to speak. Naturally, in his line of work, he'd heard all the rumours about the strangeness of Fazbear Entertainment animatronics, but this was the first time he'd ever seen anything like it for himself. "So we're not getting scrapped?" said Bonnie. She then grabbed Chica's arm and bounced on his heels with elation. "We're not getting scrapped!" Vanessa then said, Yeah, well, tomorrow the rest of the team will be coming in, so we're probably gonna have a bit more of a plan with this whole thing, so, guess you guys can, settle in or whatever." She began to pull on her coat. "I'll be back in the morning, see you guys later." Mitchell added, "Yeah, I'll stick around for a bit, just gonna finish a few things from the investigation." Vanessa waved goodbye to the group as she stepped out of the warehouse into the cool night air. As she got in the car, she noticed it was already past midnight. Sat alone for a moment, thinking everything over, from the story Rachel had told her to what just happened. Soon, she pulled out of the car park and drove away into the night. Mitchell stayed in the workshop for another hour or two, writing down his findings while taking occasional glances at the tablet to make sure Freddy and friends weren't breaking anything. But he'd spent a lot of time watching the storage room since the camera was pointed straight at Fox's box. Despite the remnant levels from it being still extremely high, he'd witnessed no activity whatsoever. He noticed every now and then BB would also peer into the box and check on it before wandering off. There was probably something going on, he thought. He went out and examined the thing again in person. This time he noticed they appeared to have two heads and wore an oil-stained pink blouse. Vanessa had told him this was one of the most hated characters in the Freddy franchise. That fact, coupled with the robot's bizarre appearance, just deeply bothered and unnerved him for reasons he couldn't quite identify. Maybe it was due to the damage this thing wasn't presenting itself, or maybe there were other reasons. Perhaps, frustratingly, this one just needed more time. He headed back to his notes. Once Mitchell had finished his tasks for the night, he came out of the room to find the animatronics hanging near the tables. "Okay, fellas, I'm gonna dip for a bit. Gonna be back later with everyone else." Freddy turned to him in almost the same way as earlier. "Oh, alright," he said, as the others stood up and started heading back to the storage room. "We'll be here when you get back." Mitchell watched them all leave. He wondered why they only activated at night, or perhaps there was some other condition. That, he thought he'd have to try out later. Vanessa had offered to be his lift home, though he declined on this occasion. Mitchell headed outside to wait for his taxi. Everything about this was very odd. The following morning, everyone was indeed gathered back at the warehouse. Mitchell and Vanessa filled in the rest of the group on what happened last night, showing the camera footage as proof. "Okay, gotta admit that's wild," said Catherine. "I guess the more things upgrade, the more really stays the same," added Jamie with a shrug. Mitchell then began to say, either they're primarily active at night, or they activate in response to knowing there are people around, which takes up Vanessa's "Ah, crap!" yelled Sanjay, stumbling to the floor. Mitchell whipped around to see Freddy and friends waving at them through the window. "Guess it's the latter," Mitchell answered to himself. After an awkward initial introduction, work began mostly as expected. One of today's objectives was to start drawing up plans for the exhibit. Firstly, the layout of the room and what inventory items would be included. Sanjay's idea so far was to be that once the customers entered the museum, they would be led into a foyer where they paid for entry, and then go into a short corridor and arrive at a large room which would be the first exhibit. He'd managed to find in the company's archives the original floor plan for the 87 pizzeria, and what he was looking for specifically was the dimensions of the stage. He didn't know if they'd want the animatronics still be able to perform, but given the current circumstances, it might not be up for him or the management to decide what they'd be getting up to. Later, Vanessa was sat on one of the crates in the storage room. She's tapping away on a laptop as she summarised the contents of the newspapers she'd found. Yeah, so sometimes we'd get people coming to the restaurant at night, she heard Bonnie explain. It wasn't very often, and they didn't ever stay very long. I think we might have scared them away. Probably, they'd usually run off and, hide themselves somewhere, said Chica. I mean, there was this one group of guys that was kind of rough, and, she pointed at her smashed face. If I was a human, I would have been, totally concussed. I remember that. They were so rude, and for what? Said Bonnie, placing his hands on his hips. At least Foxy was able to drive those ruffians off. I don't think I've ever seen people run that fast, piped up BB as he fiddled with the wires hanging from the stump of his arm. Vanessa looked up from the screen. Foxy wakes up too? She asked. There was a pause, and she thought maybe she'd slipped up by asking too early, but then BB said, sometimes she does. Not very often, though. I don't think she really has the energy for it a lot of the time, sighed Bonnie as he glanced over to the box they were contained in. I think I've seen her 2 or 3 times since the place closed down. There was those guys and, that girl from, kinda recently, I think, said Chica. I think I've kinda lost track of time. Didn't Mitchell say it's been 53 years? She slumped herself against the wall. From the conversation, Vanessa had assumed at least they weren't fully conscious and aware during their abandonment. Or at least she hoped not. She turned back to her laptop. The next few days went by, as the designs for the exhibit were finalised and the building work began in the museum. Sanjay had been busy talking with the boss about things such as what flooring to put down and getting that stage replica built. The rest of the team had been keeping an eye on the animatronics as they started opening up. They tended to stick within a room or two of where they knew people were and return to the storage room whenever the building was empty. With them getting more settled in, Jamie could begin the minor repairs on the robots, and they had some new parts ordered in, so they ended up being pretty busy. One day, Mitchell had accompanied Jamie to the workshop. Annoyingly, it turned out the easiest way to attempt to fix Freddy's arm was to remove it entirely. Easiest being a relative term, since that was proving a task in itself. These old robots had incredibly outdated ball joints that were hard to get into, coupled with the fact that the plastic outer shells surrounding them had become brittle. Fortunately, Freddy seemed to be taking it pretty well, the only notable sign of discomfort being his free hand firmly gripping the edge of the table. So, what was your old place like when it was running and stuff? Jamie asked, to which Freddy tilted his head slightly and replied, It was, well, it had its ups and downs. For the most part, the kids enjoyed themselves, and that's what we were told mattered. He stopped and thought to himself for a moment. But later on, I do think perhaps there were some issues that started cropping up. Freddy told them about how he and his fellow new animatronics hadn't been told very much towards the last few months of the pizzeria's lifespan, and for them, things just had to carry on as normal. The only reason he knew something was going on outside at all was from what those older animatronics had been trying to say. Freddy had been ordered by management to avoid interactions with them, but at night they'd come out of their room and hang around from time to time when the human staff wasn't looking or aware. They were all a bit strange and could be a bit rough around the edges, but they mostly got along. He remembered that the marionette would visit them from in the parts and services at night too, and they seemed pretty familiar. Speaking of which, I think the marionette must have been taken along with those older guys after the closure. You know, sometimes I wonder what happened to them. I hope they're okay. Mitchell was listening intently. This could be their opportunity to get some answers now they'd got Freddy rambling. Was there anything else going on? He asked. Freddy winced, to which Mitchell couldn't tell if it was from the question or Jamie finally getting his shoulder free. If there was one thing that really preoccupied me and the others, he began to say, much more solemnly despite the smile carved into his face, it was our Foxy. She'd slowly been on a decline throughout her career as it was. The kids would constantly break her, and eventually the management stopped caring to have her repaired. In fact, it felt like the management had stopped caring about her much at all, and the animatronics were just completely powerless to watch her get broken down further and further. Everything came to a head during the final week the restaurant was open, I think. There was this new nighttime security guard, nice lad he was, Freddy told them. Foxy had completely withdrawn herself, and I think he tried to reach out, but news of the closure came and they told him to come in for that final birthday party. Dear God, he was unlucky. Jamie had stopped what they were doing, and their face darkened, even behind their goggles. Freddy continued, and there was something in his voice that Mitchell felt like he was trying to convey almost a degree of anger. I think management knew what was happening, so they sent him to make sure no one went in the kids' cove, and the rest of us were told to perform and act as normal, and well, we didn't want to ruin the mood for the kids. I think one or two of them may have wandered off because I saw Jeremy rush over there and he looked in a hurry. There was a long silence before Freddy said. Then just moments later, we heard the screams. Jamie got up, covering their face with a glove, and ran out of the room. Freddy leaned forwards, resting his head in his hand as if pained. I'm so terribly sorry, he almost whispered. Mitchell stood up and told him, Hey, don't be, look, I'm gonna go find Jamie and then I'm gonna figure out what we do next. Hey man, in my line of work I come across people that need help, like all the time. Yeah. And he left the room. He found Jamie with Vanessa in the meeting room, and he knocked on the door before coming in. Is everything alright? He asked. Jamie straightened up and said, Yeah, it's fine. I think I just kinda had a moment. Yeah, said Mitchell as he turned to Vanessa and added, I think we got our bite book culprit. And of course it's the one that ain't talking. So, how are we gonna get him to? Asked Jamie. The others looked at them. Look man, Jamie sighed. Jeremy Fitzgerald, the guy that got bit, he was my great uncle. Of course, I never knew the guy, but his death was treated as this dark family secret that I was either too young to know about, or it happened in the past, so you don't need to worry about it. I had to rely on my own research to get anywhere close to answers, and as you all know, what we can't find isn't great. They leaned back in their seat. At least now I know which one of them did it, but the thing that's bothering me is why. Mitchell thought to himself about what they could do. His first thought was that night to attempt another investigation, this time with Mangle. First trying the same methods he had used for the other animatronics, and if that didn't work, he'd try his usual supernatural methods of communication. The main issue was not knowing if they'd get any response at all, or worse yet, getting one that was aggressive. From what he and Vanessa had gathered, she was rarely active at all, and the way Freddy described her was concerning. After all, she did outright attack someone, and there was definitely a risk that they'd do it again if provoked. Mitchell voiced his thoughts to the others. I could try talking to the other animatronics a bit more, see if I can get more information that might help, Vanessa offered. Then Jamie added, Yeah, when you do the investigation, I'll join you. You sure? Asked Mitchell. Honestly, yeah, replied Jamie. At least if she does act out, I'm the one that knows Fazbear combat. As the sun began to set, the team prepared for a second night of investigations. Mitchell and Vanessa had just managed to slide Foxy's box into the workshop and move it about a foot away from the table. Jamie delicately searched for a viable charging port and plugged something into the computer. Mitchell set his chair slightly further back this time, and the others had their own chairs set behind him, with Jamie's being close enough for them to rush over if need be. He'd also added a small radio to the desk, since in Vanessa's recount of the restaurant's discovery, she mentioned picking up a radio signal and using a car to follow it. The remnant reading was, as always, high whenever he was near this box of animatronic parts. That was when Mitchell said, "Alright, is everyone ready?" "Yeah," replied Jamie, leaning forwards and gripping their taser. Yeah, let's go," replied Vanessa, totally not trying to hide behind her laptop. "Alright guys," announced Mitchell. "Then it's go time," and he pushed the power button on the computer. At first nothing happened, but then Mitchell noticed the boot text beginning to scroll across the screen, and then the lights began to flicker. Pretty standard stuff. And then they went out entirely, plunging the room into complete darkness as the radio began to emit ear-piercing static wails. Mitchell heard Vanessa scream and presumably Jamie's chair slide back as they sprung to their feet. In front of this, beneath the growing radio noise, was the breaking of glass and the clanking and squeaking of metal. He could barely make out the shape of something rising out of the box, its silhouette irregular and illegible. Jamie's footsteps and the whine of a hand taser passed behind him and to his left. They were circling around the room to reach the light switch. 3 lights, which must have been the thing's eyes, tracked the mechanic's every move as it poised itself in a manner reminiscent of a snake. Suddenly he heard Jamie yell and leap away with a metallic crash and then slam on the wall. And then the lights came back on, and the radio quietened to an ambient hiss. In her full glory, Mangle somehow looked way bigger than they ever did as an inanimate pile of parts. Erupting from her hunched back was a mass of arms, cables, and pipes that trailed off in every direction or even paused in the process of reaching for the ceiling. At her shoulder, ending one of her arms where a hand should be, was a small block-shaped head that was currently looking right at Mitchell with one dull yellow eye. Her primary head was fixed on the end of a long, multi-jointed neck made from limb parts. Mitchell followed her gaze down to where he heard the crash. Jamie was on the floor, as with one of those many arms wrapped around one of their legs. They kicked off the offending limb and were able to crawl forwards and grab their taser, which they stiffly pointed at the creature. Now that the lights were on, the robot's demeanour had completely changed, going from defensive to outright fearful, shrinking away from Jamie. Once Jamie was next to Mitchell again, they slowly lowered the device. The robot responded by partially lowering themselves so that they no longer towered over the group and retracting some of their arms back into the box. It was strange to see something looking so monstrous before position itself in a way that was almost dainty and feminine. The computer screen had been smashed in the chaos, and Mitchell turned his head to see Vanessa peeking out from behind her own laptop, her eyes telling him, well, what do we do now? It was almost silent for what felt like several minutes aside from barely noticeable radio noise. Eventually Jamie was the first to speak up. "Hey man, that was like really dramatic, dude." The secondary head looked at Jamie, then at its primary counterpart, and then at the humans again. "Says the one who threw themselves at the door," it snarked in a tinny, coming from a cheap speaker sort of voice. "Minnie, what did I—" began the primary. "More importantly, where are we?" Mitchell stood up slowly, trying to avoid startling the clearly nervous machine. "I'm Mitchell. This is Jamie and Vanessa. We're here to help you and your buddies out. They're in the other room waiting for you." Vanessa walked up to the door and quietly opened it. She smiled and indicated the other animatronics could come in. The group thought it'd be best if the robots explained the situation to us, so they left the room as Freddy and friends went in for a bit. With the door closed, Vanessa sighed. "That went okay, I think," she said. "Well, no one died," replied Jamie. Mitchell peered through the gap in the door. The robots seemed to be pretty happy to have their buddy back. At least this was a step in progress. Jamie arrived in the warehouse the next morning, ready for their next day of tasks. Most of the minor repairs on the robots had been done, so now their attention was looking at any of the props to see if they were fixable. They found Vanessa in the meeting room, sorting the props and decorations. She'd already seemed to have put the objects into piles by condition and was now focused on the things that were intact enough to be displayed, sorting them by character. This drew Jamie's attention to the Toy Foxy pile. Almost all of the posters had their faces crossed out in what looked like black paint. There was a decently sized pile of merchandise for her though, which remained undamaged. Vanessa was holding one of the Foxy plushies still in its plastic bag. "Guess she never sold very well," she said. "Shame, these are really cute." Vanessa turned around. "Oh hey Jamie." She looked over at the door and said, yeah, Catherine got the guys to move some of those arcade machines over to the workshop. She said, you don't have to get them working, but maybe it'd be cool if you get the screens to light up or something. Alright, sounds reasonable, said Jamie as they looked over the stuff. I mean, I've never been as into the actual Freddy stuff as you, but I gotta say this is pretty awesome. Vanessa laughed. Yeah, it is. After a great start so far, let's hope the good luck continues. Eventually, Jamie decided to leave her for it, passing Mitchell and the animatronics as they entered the workshop. The animatronics were recounting stories from their time back at the restaurant. Chica started, oh, remember that one time we got old Bonnie to hide behind the stage curtains to, scare the manager? I mean, I think he accidentally got one of the janitors instead, but you know, she shrugged. Yeah, but the manager was able to get mad enough about it, said Bonnie. He threatened to report us to Mr. Afton. Whenever we try to have a bit of fun, actually. This manager dude sounds like he was kind of an ass, said Mitchell, as he started an internet search on whoever the hell Mr. Afton was. Freddy began to reply, well, I wouldn't have put it quite like that, but I suppose he could be a bit, pernickety, abrasive, controlling, pompous, conceited, self-serving, inconsiderate, egotistical, offensive. Well, yeah, he could be, retorted the shrill voice of Minnie as he rose from the box with his hand on what remained of his hips. The rest of Mangle had partially surfaced, a head rested on an arm draped over the edge of the box. She hadn't contributed much to the conversation yet, other than the occasional sounds of acknowledgement, though she let out a long crackling sigh at Minnie's comment. I mean, he's kinda right though, said BB. Bonnie folded his arms. Yeah, he always gave you guys an especially rough time now that I think about it. Chica slumped onto her seat. Then in the end, him and the others kinda just left. It went quiet for a minute, other than the squeaking of Freddy testing his fixed arm and BB tapping his foot. I guess there's not much use to feeling sad and constantly bringing it up though, Chica continued. Mitchell noted down what he could. He began to wonder if the key to helping the toys out was to help them find closure with the situation leading to their abandonment. Perhaps to check with Sanjay for the faintest possibility that one of the former employees was still alive. Perhaps even maybe an explanation or an apology would suffice. All of them would be pretty old by now though, and the chances were slim. Nevertheless, it was an option. The conversation soon returned to its previous lively pace, though the primary half of Mangle still sat quiet. It wasn't very often that Mitchell had to try to read into what a robot was thinking, but he got a sense a few things might be on her mind. Mitch knew all that was left for someone to get through and learn about the biting incident, so he could see the puzzle complete. Evening came around and Jamie left the workshop for the final time that day. Now almost everything was ready to be moved into the museum, except for one last thing. They glanced over at Foxy's box as it now had affectionately been dubbed. Sorry about threatening to tase ya. Company training, policy, you know, all that, they said stiffly. It's quite alright, dear, replied the machine from inside. I'm really quite used to it. Jamie didn't know what to make of that response. Jamie sat down a short distance away and thought deeply for a moment. The questions had been growing ever louder in their mind all day, and now might be the best opportunity they had. You know, I had someone in the family who used to work at a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, they said. The box clanked and rustled as its occupant began to present themselves. Jamie continued slowly. It was a long time ago. Too long for me to have met the guy myself, but I always wondered what it was like for him. If working with the animatronics was, for him, anything like how it is today with me. Mangle propped themselves against the wall in the same sitting pose they had took on shortly after the lights came back on the previous night. She tilted her head and asked softly, "What was his name?" Jamie replied, "Jeremy Fitzgerald." Jeremy. Both of Mangle's faces fell. Jeremy. Some of their pipes began to quiver as they placed one of their hands over her primary mouth. "I'm sorry," she squeaked. Jamie already knew the answer, but decided to push. "What happened to Jeremy?" "Jeremy was the only human in that godforsaken place that tried to help me, and I... Okay, man, Jamie said, trying to sound reassuring. Can you start from a bit earlier in the timeline? It was back in the late summer of the year 1987, and the new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza had been open for about 3 seasons. Evening had finally drawn in, closing time, and the last of the customers had left. It had been another hard day for Toy Foxy. Her ear had been pulled loose again. Mini Foxy was on the other side of Kid's Cove, and one of the connectors to her leg had been broken. She had to crawl across the floor to get to her hand puppet. Passing a plastic mirror that was in the play area, she looked over herself and noticed that her bow was coming undone and there was a crack forming over her eye socket. Fortunately, Freddy came along and took notice. "Good heavens," he said as he came in and helped her stand up. "They really put you through the ringer again." Freddy slung her arm over his shoulder and helped her walk, retrieving Minnie along the way. As they slowly walked along to parts and services, Freddy said, "Well, I think I heard the staff say they're getting some money in from the higher-ups." He chuckled a bit and said, "I sure hope it's going into giving us a bit of TLC. There's some doubt, but it can't help to hope." Foxy laughed in response. "Yeah, that would be nice." As they reached the door, one of the technicians let them in and Foxy was sat on the workbench. I'm gonna go grab the boss and some more guys. Be back in a sec," the technician said, as they walked out of the room. This routine had happened practically every night for the past few weeks. The 2 animatronics would always wait together. Soon, the technician came back with an assistant and the manager, who first dismissed Freddy. The bear waved quietly as he left the room. As much as it pained him, there was little he could do against his superior's orders. And then the manager said, "In here again? Look at you." Foxy nodded and looked down at the floor. The manager began to pace the room. "Not much to say. You already know the drill at this point, Foxy. Gotta shut you down and patch you up for the kiddies tomorrow." "Yes, boss," replied Foxy, not wanting to look up at the man. And they took one of the technicians to the side and mumbled something into their ear. From the corner of Foxy's vision, she briefly saw him look shocked, but then say with little confidence, "If you say so, sir." The manager stood in front of the door and turned his head to look at the people in the room. As the technicians powered her down and her digital conscience began to fade, she heard the manager say, "Don't worry, Foxy, the kids still love you. Love you to bits." It felt like she'd been out for an unusually long time when she finally came back online. Everything hurt. Every part of her body felt like it was in the wrong place. She felt for her hand and found 5. In agony, she dragged herself towards the mirror again. I couldn't bring myself to look in that mirror anymore. I was hurt. I was so hurt and angry. I felt like I'd been betrayed. I knew after that they'd been plotting this the whole time. The animatronics shakily continued, wrapping her many arms around themselves. The last straw was when they started calling me that, and I think I lost it. Jamie was now unsettled as the robot began laughing to themselves. "Then what about Jeremy?" Jamie asked. "Was he one of the people that did that to you?" Some of Mangle's arms sagged. No, he wasn't. Jeremy was different. Jeremy was a young man who worked the night shift. Although none of the animatronics were really themselves at the time, he tried to make conversations from behind the protection of an old Freddy head that he used as a mask. Sometimes he'd sit next to the vents and talk to whoever was inside. Although he knew little of what was going on, he tried to be understanding. Mangle came to kind of appreciate a human that seemed to care, even under those circumstances. By the end of the week, however, I just couldn't take it anymore. We all knew there was going to be one last party, and I knew I was going to lash out at the first human I could get my hands on. And that person ended up being Jeremy. She faced away from Jamie, hunched over and choking back mechanical sobs and screams. Any anger or loathing Jeremy could have felt almost melted into pity. They finally had their answer as to what happened in the Bite of 87 and to Jeremy Fitzgerald. They finally had the revelation of the family secret, and they weren't sure if it made them feel better or worse. Jamie waited for a lull in the robot's outburst and stood up. "Thank you," they said. Mangle slowly craned their neck around. What? She asked. Look, for telling me the truth, look, I'm not mad at you, man. I kinda get it. What happened to you, like, really sucked, and I'm not good at this kind of thing. Well, hey, you kinda got, like, gunk coming out of your eye. Mangle wiped her empty socket with the edge of her bow, leaving what looked like another oil stain. Oh, that happens sometimes. They sunk half back down into the box, still shaking a little. Jamie sat back down and said, well, do you think there's anything I can try to get sorted for you? Like, I'd call myself a decently skilled mechanic, but you're kind of an exceptional situation. The robot tried to laugh. You know what, dear, after all these years, I don't even know what I want. That's kind of understandable, Jamie thought, and then they said, okay, so, kind of related? I'm starting to think about the whole museum thing. I think I might have a couple ideas of something I could have arranged for you. Not long after, Jamie met with the rest of the team in the meeting room and turned on the interactive whiteboard. Alright, so I was talking with the bots last night and I came up with how we're going to do one part of the exhibit, they explained. And then they showed off some concept art of a small closed off section of the room with a giant claw machine in the centre. Jamie then considered. So apparently Mangle used to find places to hide in the restaurant during the day, including this one really funny incident Chica told me about where they'd managed to get themselves in one of those claw machine things, and it took like all day for the staff to open it up and get them back out. So yeah, I was thinking we could put her in this and like shove those plushies in there. Then A, we don't have to worry so much about idiots trying to get to bits of her, and B, she gets to like pop out and scare people or something. What do you guys think? Oh, that's friggin' hilarious, said Catherine. She looked at Sanjay. You think this is doable? He shrugged and replied, yeah, I can ask the boss. After the meeting, Jamie reported what they'd learned to Mitchell and Vanessa, although they still didn't really know how to feel. Then they discussed the best way to go forwards with presenting the information they'd found to the higher-ups at Fazbear. They knew first to omit all of the animatronics' personal feelings, not that the company would really care that much. From Vanessa's report, it looked like the company would rewrite the story into making Mangle this horrifying force of evil if it meant for a scarier and more marketable tale, which kinda sucked, but she wasn't going to waste her energy arguing with higher-ups when everything else was going on. As for the other toys, they seemed pretty happy about the chance to be on stage again, even if in a very different form from before. For now though, Sanjay was already taking a phone call from someone in the company informing him they'd secured another set of animatronics for the next exhibit. Oh yeah, one last thing that was really weird, added Jamie. She kinda cried this weird black oil at some point, and I've never seen an animatronic do that before. Oh my god, it's agony, yelled Mitchell, putting his hands to his face so aggressively it almost knocked off his hat. That makes so much sense. Neither Jamie nor Vanessa knew what he meant, although it definitely sounded like more spooky ghost stuff. Then Mitchell ran off to grab his notes and started furiously writing things down.